There is a certain image familiar to many Americans over 40 when thinking about World War II tank warfare. It is the image of the German big cats, panthers and tigers, steel monsters that, for much of the conflict, dominated the battlefield with terrifying precision. Their sloped armor, long guns, and long-range accuracy became part of a legend that still persists today. And for many months in 1944, that legend had real weight. American tankers and Sherman tanks knew the dangers well. The standard 75 mm guns often bounced harmlessly off a Panther's glacis plate, while the German 75 mm KWK-42 could reach out and kill at distances where American crews struggled even to identify the source of fire. But in the last year of the war, quietly and almost unexpectedly, this story began to change. Not because of a massive new tank or a revolutionary doctrine, but because of a weapon that looked almost unimpressive, the American 90 mm M3 gun. Its introduction on the M36 tank destroyer, supported by innovative ammunition and smart battlefield tactics, marked a turning point. And the best way to tell that story is through real units, real officers, and real engagements. To understand the shift, we begin in the hedgerows of France. The 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, attached to the 3rd Armored Division, the famed Spearhead Division, encountered the Panther repeatedly throughout the Normandy campaign. Veterans from the 3rd Armored, including Lieutenant Charles B. Shea, recalled how their 75 mm Shermans struggled desperately to penetrate German front armor. In early engagements near Villers-Fossard and Roncy, Panther crews stood off American tanks with near impunity, using range and protection to devastating effect. But the arrival of the M36 in the autumn of 1944 changed the dynamics. The 703rd received its first batch of 90 mm armed tank destroyers in September. Their crews trained quickly, learning the nuances of a weapon that finally gave them the power to challenge the Panther frontally. Early tests proved promising, but the real proof came in combat. One of the earliest documented successes occurred during the Siegfried Line fighting, when the 3rd Armored Division, under the command of General Maurice Rose, advanced toward Stolberg. Veteran gunner Sergeant Francis Red Martin of the 703rd recalled an engagement outside Mausbach where his M36 fired on a Panther from roughly 1,000 yards. The gunner expected yet another bounce, but instead, the 90 mm round smashed straight through the front armor. The Panther erupted in smoke. "We didn't believe it ourselves at first," Martin said years later. "We had never seen anything go through a Panther like that." These kinds of engagements were not isolated. During the Lorraine campaign, the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, supporting the 81st Infantry Division, used their newly arrived M36 to break up armored counterattacks by the German 11th Panzer Division. Veterans described how HVAP ammunition, when available, turned the M36 into a long-range tank killer capable of matching anything Germany fielded. But nowhere were these weapons tested more fiercely than in the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge. In the early hours of December 19, 1944, German armored spearheads surged toward Hotten, a key town guarding approaches deeper into Belgium. Panther tanks of the 116th Panzer Division advanced along icy roads, expecting to crush light American resistance. But positioned on the overlooking ridgelines were American tank destroyer crews from the 823rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, one of the few units already equipped with the M36. Lieutenant Arthur Rush, commanding a platoon of M36, held his fire until the Panthers committed to the Valley Road. At roughly 900 yards, Rush's gunners opened up. In minutes, multiple Panthers were destroyed, some by frontal hits from the 90 mm guns firing APCBC, others from flank shots as the German formation attempted to turn and withdraw. German officers initially reported that their tanks had been ambushed by British 17-pounder guns. Only later did intelligence indicate these were American tank destroyers. Another well-documented example comes from the 7th Armored Division near St. Vith. The 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion, facing repeated assaults by Panthers of the 2nd SS Panzer Division, held a series of defensive lines where M36s engaged Panthers from ridge to ridge. A surviving after-action report notes that one M36 destroyed a Panther at 1,200 yards, a shot that would have been nearly impossible for a Sherman, These successes, however, came at a cost. The tank destroyers had thin armor, and crews relied heavily on concealment and smart positioning. Among the most dramatic accounts comes from the 776th Tank Destroyer Battalion, fighting around Bastogne. On December 24th, an M36 commanded by Sergeant Glenn McCarthy engaged a Panther that had knocked out several Sherman tanks. McCarthy fired an HVAP round, one of only two his crew possessed, striking the Panther below the turret ring, destroying it instantly. The crew later recalled how rare and precious those HVAP rounds were, issued sparingly due to America's limited tungsten reserves. This scarcity of tungsten, a metal essential to HVAP design, meant crews often received only 2 or 3 rounds for an entire vehicle. The U.S. Army prioritized distribution based on intelligence reports about German armored concentrations, diverting supplies from industrial production to ensure frontline units had at least a handful of the precious penetrators. The Germans suffered from shortages of their own. The Ruhr, heavily bombed by Allied air forces, struggled to produce high-quality tungsten cores for their own advanced ammunition. Even the prestigious Panzer Division increasingly complained about lacking armor-piercing composite rounds late in 1944. As the Allies advanced into Germany in early 1945, the Panther lost much of its early war supremacy. In Cologne, during the famous tank duel at the Cathedral Square, the 3rd Armored Division fielded both Shermans and a Pershing. The gunner of the M26 Pershing, Clarence Smoyer, one of the best-known tankers of the 3rd Armored, demonstrated the power of American heavy guns by destroying a Panther in a matter of seconds. Although this was not an M36 kill, it symbolized the broader transformation. America finally had weapons capable of meeting and defeating German armor head-on. In the Ruhr pocket, the 631st Tank Destroyer Battalion combined M10 and M36 to dismantle the last armored remnants of the German Ninth Army. In one report, an M36 under Lieutenant Jack Guthrie destroyed 3 Panthers in a single afternoon near the Dortmund-Ems Canal. Through these examples, real names, real units, real battles, we see the quiet shift that took place on the Western Front. American firepower, once inadequate against the Panther's sloped armor, had adapted. The 90mm gun gave U.S. forces the long-range punch they desperately needed. HVAP ammunition, despite its limited supply, could slice through German armor once thought impenetrable. And the soldiers who manned these machines, men from the 703rd, 705th, 776th, 823rd, and so many other battalions, turned the tide through skill, discipline, and courage under fire. This is not the story Hollywood usually tells, but it is the story preserved in after-action reports, in veterans' interviews, in diaries, and in the unit histories of America's armored forces. The Panther's aura of invulnerability, so powerful in 1943 and 1944, did not survive the winter of 1944 to 45. American innovation, American industry, and above all, American soldiers ended it. This is the true account of how the Panther lost its shadow. Not to a myth, not to propaganda, but to men and machines who fought it on real battlefields, under real fire, and changed the outcome of the war's final year.